Okay, so I know you've got a presentation coming up for your lab experiment. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how to prepare and to deliver a technical presentation. But before I do, I want to share my story with you. And what I hope to do with this is, number one, challenge your idea of what it means to do a presentation. And the other thing is to help you see the importance of developing your ability to do presentations now while you're still in school. Okay, so my story starts back when I was in school. I was in graduate school at Purdue. I was studying advanced manufacturing. And like you, I was working with technical things. And I loved doing the technical things. I had so much fun because I had some of the most state-of-the-art equipment in the world to play with there and to learn from. But then I found myself face to face with the President of the United States. And it was my job to do a presentation for him to explain my research in a way that he could understand it and be able to see some of the work that Purdue's doing. So that was my first real introduction into doing presentations, but it wasn't the last. So I went on, I graduated, I went to work for Master Brand Cabinets. One of our plants was called Aristocraft, and we were doing an automation project. And I remember my boss walked in and he said, "Bill, we're going to Boston." And I'm like, "Okay." He said, "You need to present this project to A.D. Little. Any project over $1 million has to go to them and they have to say yes before it gets approved." Now, A.D. Little was an international consulting company with over 1,000 employees and 38 offices, so no pressure. So I had to do a presentation to convince them that we knew what we were doing, we had the right team put together, and they should give us the several $1 million that we were asking for to do this project. Well, they should tell Fortune Brands to give us that money. That presentation was successful. We did get the money, and we continued to move on with the project. So you fast forward a little bit more, my boss walks in and he says, "Bill, I need you to do a presentation for Norm Wesley." And here's Norm Wesley. And probably like you, I said, "Well, who's Norm Wesley?" And he started laughing. And he said, "Norm Wesley is the head of Fortune Brands who owned us. These are some of the companies that Fortune Brand owned." And at the time, Fortune Brand's assets were about $16 billion. So Norm Wesley was on a trip. He wanted to stop by the plant. And it was my job to do a presentation for him, to update him on the project, and to let him know how things were going. Again, that presentation went very well. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a few minutes. And so the project continued. And then I find myself in another situation doing presentations, but this time I'm in front of over 300 employees. And what we were doing is we were creating the rough mill of the future. And so it was my job to explain to these employees what we were doing, what was going to happen, that I needed their help in order to complete this, and to put their mind at ease that nobody was going to lose their job and nobody was going to take a cut in pay in the midst of this. And again, I think we were very successful in this presentation because in the middle of this project, a union from one of our other plants came, attempted to unionize the workforce here, and it didn't work. They didn't want anything to do with it. So evidently we were able to put their mind at ease. They felt comfortable and continued with the project. And then one more example of a presentation is, on many accounts, I found myself sitting across from a conference room table from these two ladies as well as several others, explaining to them parts of the layout, hearing from them what worked, what didn't work, getting insight into how things really worked on the shop floor, and adapting and continuing to have those meetings until we had a system designed that truly fit like a glove for them and for them to be able to do their job exactly like we wanted it to be. So you see, we think about presentations a lot of times in terms of standing up, doing a speech in class or a TED Talk or something like that, but that's only one kind of presentation. You see, one kind of presentation is a formal presentation or like a speech. That's very much like what I had to do for all of the employees. I was up in a very formal environment doing a speech letting them know everything that was going on. But another kind of presentation is a technical, formal technical presentation. That's what I did for A.D. Little. Again, it was a very formal environment and it was very, very technical. It was a technical presentation, not at all like the content or even the environment of what we did with the plant. A.D. Little, all the environment, everything we set was very formal, very professional. For the plant, it was a very relaxed environment. It was a very warm environment. Then also a formal meeting. When I was sitting across talking to the employees, I would call that a formal meeting. We had set a time, we had set an agenda, we came together, but we were sitting across the conference table talking. It was a formal meeting. And then another kind of presentation is informal meeting. You go in and I'm going to talk to my boss, and I need something from him. I need approval of something to move forward with the project. All of these are examples of presentations. They're all very, very important, and they all demand preparation to be successful. So that's one of the things that I want to communicate to you, to begin to broaden your view of what it really means to do a presentation. Okay, so here's what I want to do with you on presentations. First, I want to help you understand whatever kind of those presentations it is, what it is you're trying to do. Then I'm going to tell you some of the unique aspects of a technical presentation, talk briefly about some steps that you can use to prepare your presentations, and then give you some tips specifically for your technical presentations like you can use in the lab one coming up. Okay, so first let's get started. What are you trying to do with any presentation? You have an idea in your head, and you're trying to get that idea in the other person's head. That's what a presentation is. For A.D. Little, I had an idea in my head that we knew what we were doing, we had the right team put together, and I wanted to create that idea in their head so they would tell Fortune Brands, give them the money. With the Platt employees, I had an idea in my head where I knew exactly what we were going to do. I knew how we were going to do it in the plant, and I knew what help I needed from them, and I knew how we had put things in place to protect them. I wanted to create that in their mind so they would be put at ease. You get the idea. So anytime you're doing a presentation, it starts with really thinking about where your audience is now, where they are at the end of your presentation, and saying what's different. What are they left with? What knowledge do they have that they didn't have? Or how are they feeling different than they felt before? Like the presentation with the employees, it was very important to me that when they left, they felt calm, they felt heard, and they felt safe. They knew what was going on, and they knew that they were going to be protected. And to just ask yourself, what key idea do you want them to walk away with? So that's the first thing I want you to realize. When someone says, hey, I need you to do a presentation, that doesn't mean go do a PowerPoint. That means you've got something in your head and you want to create it in the other person's head. How do you do that? You do that with any trick in the book. Now, what do I mean by that? You design an experience to tell your story. You've got something in your head and you want to create it in their head. You've got a story that you want to tell them in order to create that. You want to take the idea in your head, use the environment, the mood of the room, the information, everything that is there with the experience, to take that idea from your head and to transfer it to their head. At A.D. Little, our presentation started as soon as we stepped off the plane. It didn't start that next day when we were actually scheduled to go to their office. When I got off the plane, I was introduced as Dr. Bill Fortney. Now, nobody calls me Dr. Bill Fortney at the plant. I was Bill. But we were creating a mood. We were setting the tone that we were professional, that we had the right people put together, and that we could get this job done. When Norm Wesley came to the plant, for A.D. Little, everybody was dressed in their best suits, all that kind of thing. When Norm Wesley came to the plant, he was on a golfing trip. He was stopping by the plant just to it was very informal. I was dressed business casual, very much like this. In fact, I probably had a pair of jeans on. The room was set very informal. We had a table set up with some light refreshments and tea. So you see, when you're trying to create an idea from your head to their head, when you're trying to tell your story, you use all of those things to do it. It's not just what you say. It's not just the PowerPoint. It's everything about the experience. You're creating an experience to take that person through. That's how you're going to go and do it. So what you want to do is look very closely at what you're trying to accomplish and then design an experience to accomplish it. I'm going to give you some steps to help you do that, but that's really what you want to try to do when you have a presentation, whatever kind it is. Okay, now technical presentations are very unique. First thing is, a technical presentation is not a speech. You don't go into a technical presentation and look at the back of the wall because you're bad at eye contact. No, a technical presentation, it's a formal, structured working meeting. It's a structured conversation. If you've done your job well leading a technical presentation, everybody feels like when they leave that they've just come out of sitting down in a meeting and they've been having a conversation. That's what you try to do with a technical presentation. Now, that does not mean that you don't prepare. You definitely prepare for a technical presentation. Because remember what you're trying to do. Whatever kind of presentation it is, if it's a formal speech, if it's an informal meeting going into your boss's office, you're trying to get an idea from your head into someone else's head. For a technical presentation, the delivery is very fluid. It's very conversational. You want to be real. You want to be personable. And the key to your success is very, very often how you respond to questions. Technical presentations are usually done for engineers. Engineers want details, they want facts, and they're usually going to ask questions. How you handle those questions very often is the key to the success of your technical presentation. And I'm going to give you some tips on how to do that, okay? So you see the difference. You want to think of that technical presentation as a structured conversation, but you do have to prepare. Okay, so how do you put a presentation together? How do you design an experience to accomplish those what's? Here's 5 steps. There's nothing magic about them. They may or may not help you. They help me. But the point is, you do want to deliberately design the experience. Okay, so first, I'm going to go through these pretty quick for you. Know your subject. Technical presentations are done for engineers. Details matter. You need to know your subject and know it well. You can't snow an engineer. You can't pretend like you know what you're talking about. You need to know your subject. Okay, the second thing, as with any presentation, you got to know your audience and what it is you're trying to accomplish. You know, there's the normal things with the audience, but for a technical presentation, you got to know what's important to them. For an engineer, they like facts. They like to know why. They like details. So keep that in mind when you're designing your presentation. Also, know what you want from them. For AD Little, it was very clear what we wanted. We wanted them to tell Fortune Brands, yes, give them the money. So when the presentation was over, we asked for that. For your technical presentations, very often you want feedback. Well, that means you need to give them enough background and enough details so that they can give you the feedback. You're not trying to just sneak by them and get your design past them. If it's a technical design review, you want them to have the details to be able to give you feedback and to find something that you may have missed. Okay, the other thing is define your what's. What is it that you really want to accomplish in your presentation? And I've talked about the AD Little one. Our what was we wanted them to say yes. Norm Wesley, my what was I wanted him to feel like we appreciated his money and we were being good stewards of it. So everything we did, that informal environment that I talked about, was all trying to say thank you and we're being good stewards with their money. For you, if you've done an experiment, the big what's that somebody's going to want to know is, okay, what was your question? What were you trying to find out? How did you go about doing it? So I know whether I can trust your results or not. What was your answer? What did you find out? And then what's coming next? If it's a design review, you're going to have different what's. If it's a requirements review, you're going to have different what's. But you've got to know your audience and know exactly what it is you're trying to create. That's the first step. Okay, next one, determining your key points. And this is really where all the work is. You know what you want to accomplish. You know your subject, you know your audience. Now you have to say, okay, what are the specific things that I need to cover or moods or whatever I need to create to take that person from beginning to at the end, them having that idea in your head. And the way I do it is I brainstorm. I think, okay, what do I need to talk about? And I start making a list. I close my eyes and I imagine people there. What do they need to know? What's important? And then I start to make an outline. I look at all the things I wrote down. I begin to group them under some main things that come together. And then I create a rough outline trying to structure the ideas that I need to create to people. Then number 4, once you know what you want to create, you have to make it flow. And this is really important because in order for you to get the idea from your head to their head, you've got to tell your presentation has to create a series of steps that tells your story. You've got to take the person from where they are and logically step them through step by step each idea, each part of the environment, whatever it is that you've created has to logically tell the story with each step so when you're done, they have that idea in your head. That's what you have to do with your presentation as you're planning exactly the pieces that you're going to put together. Imagine that if you've brought somebody this far and then all of a sudden you leave a piece out. You either don't tell them something or you have this real fun environment as they walk in and then all of a sudden you get real serious. They don't match. There's a step. You've missed something. There's not a flow of the experience. Then all of a sudden you're going to go up to this last step. They're going to fall down. They're not going to have their idea in their head. If I did that to 80 Little at the end of the presentation and I said, will you tell Fortune Brands that we have a plan put together and to give us the money? They'd be like, no, because they were lost back on that step and they think we're crazy. So that's why you've got to be very careful in planning as you go through there. No matter what kind of presentation you're doing, for you to create a logical flow like that demands preparation. You have to design the experience to flow. You've got to make sure that each piece plays its part to take that person there. Now, if you're going into an informal meeting with your boss, you're trying to get an idea in his head. You need to stop and think about what do I tell them so that they'll understand what I'm talking about and let me move forward or whatever it is you want to do. Now, you may write that down on the back of a sheet of paper to structure your ideas, but my point is you want to think of all those experiences as presentations and you want to prepare for them. You may take 5 minutes preparing for your boss. You may take 5 days preparing for a formal speech, but you want to view presentations as all those opportunities. Even if you're going down on the floor to talk to an artisan, you want to stop and think, okay, what am I trying to accomplish? Okay, what needs to happen for that? How do I walk up? How do I introduce myself? What do I want to say to get the point across about what I'm doing? You see what I mean? That's why I say you need to think broader about what a presentation really is and begin to learn to prepare for those experiences. Okay, remember the sections that you have available to tell your story. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. Beforehand, don't forget that when people arrive, that's part of your presentation. And after you're done and people are hanging around, both of those times you are communicating. So be careful, the presentation's over, don't let down and then start saying things that are going to blow whatever it is that you just said. Especially beforehand, think about the room setup. The greeting. Will you be at the door greeting them? How will you greet them? What will you talk about before the presentation starts? Or are you just going to stand there and be awkward? If you don't think about it, it's very likely you're going to stand there and be awkward. So you want to think, you want to plan that. And then the standard things we're kind of used to, the introduction, the body, the conclusion. The introduction, you want to make sure you connect with people. Hopefully you've done that beforehand. Let them know what's coming. The body is where all the guts are going to be. The conclusion, you tie things together, you leave your impression. And 80 Little, we wanted something, so we asked for it. Okay, don't forget to ask if you need something from your audience. Okay, and then the last thing is make it live. That's your stories, your visual. That's your PowerPoint is what people typically think about. So you want to plan any additional visuals, and I've got visuals in quotes, I'll tell you why in a second, that you need to support your story. Okay, so first of all, when I say visuals, I mean PowerPoint diagrams, physical models, simulations, the whiteboard, the way the room's arranged. Anything visual that you can use to help support your story. And you want to use visuals to enhance your message. You want to use visuals to help do what it's hard to do with words. And select the correct one for the job. You can spend a lot of time putting something together in PowerPoint that you could have done in 2 seconds by just holding something up, okay? So remember, especially if it's a technical presentation, it's a structured meeting. You can go from PowerPoint to something physical, to back to PowerPoint. You can do that, so use that to your advantage. Okay, so those are the steps for putting a presentation together. You see what we're trying to do. And so I've just got some general tips for you. Now these are for any presentation. Be prepared, show up early, test on the equipment that you're going to use. Don't assume the speakers work. Don't assume your PowerPoint will work. Don't assume the projector connects like you need. Go early. You don't want to be running around while people are coming. If you need to use outline and notes, obviously don't read them. It's better not to have them at all, to know your subject, let your slides step you through, practice. For a technical presentation, engineers will know if you're winging it, and they will eat you alive. Especially practice your opening. Be calm and confident. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. You know to look at people. If there's a particular person that's distracting you, they're not paying attention or whatever, you're naturally going to try to want to bring them in. You may not be able to. You may need to just skip them, because by focusing on them, it's going to cause you to lose all the rest of the group. That's what I mean, scan and ignore. Don't apologize. Don't say, oh, well, we meant to have this ready, but no. Come in with what you have and present it. Now, if you make a mistake in the presentation, apologize. Say, oh, no, I'm sorry, that wasn't right. We didn't really, yeah. But I mean, don't apologize for what you've done. Also, support your team. Don't say, well, I wanted to, but my team couldn't get together and meet. Oh, this person right here didn't. No. A formal, when you've got other people in the room, is not the time to air dirty laundry about your team. Come as a unified front. Dress appropriately, always business casual for a presentation or above, depending upon what it is. And then have fun. Enjoy doing your presentation. So those are just general tips. But let me tell you some specific things for when you're doing a technical presentation. And you're trying to take that person from where they are, use the mood, the environment, the information, and create those ideas in their head. First thing is assume nothing. You've been living with this subject, the rest of the people haven't. So don't assume that they know things, and don't be bashful telling them details. A lot of times people are afraid to go into details when they've been working on a problem for another company or whatever, because it's really their problem. You've been living this, you know these details, so don't be bashful about boring them or giving them the details. They will tell you if they already know it, and they'll tell you to move on. Remember, it's a working meeting, and so they'll tell you that. Another thing, anticipate their questions. If you're going to have a logical flow to take them from A to B and tell your story, you need to anticipate their questions and answer them so you don't leave them behind. And then the other thing is keep people oriented. And here's what I mean by that. People get lost in the details. They get lost if they don't see connections. So what you always want to do is give them the big picture, the why, and then give them the details. So like at the beginning of your presentation, let them know what's coming. When you go to a new topic, help them understand that you're transitioning, what you're about to talk about now. Don't just jump into the next topic. You know, now you're talking about your experimental design. Well, what design? Well, so here's the question that we wanted to answer. The way we went about answering that is we specifically designed an experiment. We're going to give you the details of that now. See, big picture. And then throughout your presentation, tell why are you showing this on the screen, and then give the details. The first thing we did with our data is we wanted to make sure that we had we saw how our main factor affected it. So we graphed it on a line graph with that factor laid out. Here's a graph of that. Don't just show the graph and say, here's the graph of our main factor. Why did you put that there? We're trying to see how that first affected. That's what I mean when I say give the what, because that orients people to the detail. So make sure they know why something's on the screen. Okay, another one for technical presentation. Come in confident and own the room. This is your meeting, so take charge and act like it. Don't come in timid. This is your meeting, but be humble, gracious, and respectful. Be real, be personable. Remember, it's not a speech. It is a formal, structured working meeting. You're now the expert on this particular subject, especially if you've been doing a design problem and you're studying their system and the requirements. But be quick to see, to admit when you've missed something, when you've misunderstood something. It's still their system, and even if what they're saying doesn't quite make sense, be respectful in how you communicate that with them. Okay, and this is a big one, manage your handouts. A lot of times with technical presentations, you do want to have handouts, and you want to let people know what they have in front of them and what you want them to do with the material. If not, engineers are going to be flipping through it while you're talking. But if you say, okay, now in front of you, you have a copy of our slides, you also have our experimental plan. What I'd like for you to do is, as I go through, I'm going to refer to that and tell you what page to turn to. So if you'll please wait, I'll lead you. So you want to manage your handouts. Direct people to the handout when they need to reference it. I already mentioned that. And then be careful about having the same material in multiple places and it being different, and that goes to version control. As a group, you want to make sure that you're managing the versions of material. So the person doing the graphs and the person doing the PowerPoint don't have two different versions of something. So the graph has one thing labeled and the presentation has something else. And then don't forget your opening slide. A lot of times your opening slide is something that people look at longer than anything else. It's usually the slide that's there as people are coming in the room. They're sitting there depending upon how you're interacting with them, and they're looking at that. So it should look good. It should give a clear message about what this meeting's all about. So don't forget to really spend time on that opening slide. Okay, managing questions. Remember I said technical presentation? That this right here is one of the keys to it being successful. So you're going to get a couple of different kinds of questions. One, you're going to get straightforward questions. And there's two ways you can handle that. One way is you can say, if this is true, I'm going to cover this later. Is it okay that I wait? So if you know their question, you're going to get to it, you can say that. If the person says, no, I really want to, well, then you need to go with them, because remember, this is fluid. You need to jump and answer it. And that's the other one. If they ask a straightforward question, you can answer it. And remember, be fluid. It's conversational. Jump ahead if necessary. And when you get to that spot in your presentation, don't just be like a robot and say it all again. Say, we talked about this earlier with the question. Is everybody okay here? Or would you like me to go over it again? Remember, it's a working meeting. Okay, now, when the questions aren't straightforward, when they're more objections, here's where you have to be careful. Well, you have to be careful on this one that you don't get all exasperated by jumping. You're ready to be fluid. With these, you need to be ready to logically defend your position with confidence. When someone asks, what challenges you on something, it's okay to answer, but you also need to know when to just accept their feedback and say thank you. If there's more information that they need, give that to them on your position. If you just don't agree with what they're saying, well, who cares? You ask for their feedback. Accept it, say thank you, take it, think through it, and decide what to do with it, okay? Also, don't be defensive. Your goal in a technical presentation when people are making objectives is not to win. Your goal is to hear what they're saying and be improved by it, for your design to be improved by it. It's not to win. Carefully think through any comments you make before you make them. When you're on your feet, it's hard to think sometimes, and especially an engineer that's asking you questions, they can take you down a rabbit hole and get you buried pretty deep quickly if you just talk off the cuff without thinking through it. So think through your comments. And then be quick to change your mind and say the following: you're right. The person objected, you're going back and forth with them, and all of a sudden you realize the point they're making is correct. Say, you know what, you're right. That is a better way. Say to them, I don't know. Back to that, carefully think through your comments. If they ask you something that you don't know, then say, I don't know, but I'll get back with you. Now, your team members can help. If another team member knows the answer, say, I can address that. Remember, it is a working meeting. It's fine to do that. If you didn't think about it, just say, we didn't even address that. If you're not sure, you can say, here are my initial thoughts, but I haven't really worked through this, but you want to be careful with that. The same thing about getting yourself worked into a hole, okay? You've got to manage questions and not speak when you don't know. You're going to get yourself in trouble. Okay, manage your meeting. And what I mean by that is somebody should be taking notes. You've asked these engineers there, they're giving you feedback. They're going to be very offended if they don't see somebody taking notes, because they're like, well, why am I wasting my time telling them these things? Because they're not going to remember. You want to capture action items. That's going to especially be for your design reviews. For your experiment, there's not really going to be action items. But when it's a design review, there will. And then at the end of every meeting, you'll clarify those action items so people are clear on exactly what's going to happen afterwards. Okay, so I hope that I have been able to give you a broader perspective of what doing a presentation is and help you see that you're going to be doing a lot of these, even if it's going in and talking to your boss. And you need to prepare for all of them, because you're telling your story, taking that person from where they are to understanding what you're trying to tell them, to then take whatever action that you want them to do. And I've given you some steps that can help you do that. But however you do it, just deliberately design an experience, not a PowerPoint, design an experience to tell your story. Okay, so I look forward to hearing your presentations on your design experiments this semester.